Congratulations, Mr. Sonia Yer, on behalf of the European for being awarded Investment Firm CEO of the Year 2014 in Africa.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And let me just say, I take this on behalf of the firm and the people I work with, and of course my family, who's ably represented by my daughter here, Sasha Iman. So thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Sonia Yer is founder of Dunlor & Merrifield and the pioneer CEO of Nigeria Mortgage Refinance Company. He has amassed over 21 years of solid corporate and structured finance, corporate banking and asset management experience. He's been awarded Investment Firm CEO of the Year 2014 in Africa and joins us today to talk about Nigeria's financial market and efforts being made to resolve his country's housing deficit. Welcome.
Thank you.
You founded your company Dunlor & Merrifield in 2009 and now you've been awarded for your role as a CEO. So what do you attribute your success to?
I think let me first say that, thank you so much for the award. It's highly appreciated and I'm very proud of it, especially, when it cuts across the countries on the continent. I think I have to give, credence to the people I work with. They've been an immense contribution, or they made an immense contribution to the success of DLM, as we call it. Some people call it Dunlor, and all kinds of different names. But a great bunch of people. I think, I've just been able to, like I said, I try to have a style that's very open, and I think that it's helped people working with me to be more themselves, rather than feeling like they work, in a, it's I won't call it informal, but I would say from a mindset perspective, it comes across as a very informal place to work, which allows people that expression, and that allows them to be able to, let me use the term, think outside the box. And I think that's been very helpful in the recognition that we've had over the years as the kind of firm that when you're looking for things that are outside the box and things that are just unusual, things that are just not what you'd find in the market, what firm would you speak to? You're looking to do something that's just, has never been done before, needs a new structure or whatever, what firm, a DLM will come up and say that those are the people you speak to. And that's been great. So,
because what services does Dunlor & provide?
We started as an advisory firm in 2009, basically raising capital for companies, for governments, etc., and also providing advisory services, M&A, etc. So that all comes under the advisory business. Then the success of that led to our setting up a securities firm. And we set up a brokerage firm, a stock brokerage that is, and also a securities trading firm. And now we're a licensed market maker. We make markets in equities, we make markets in debt, and we also provide brokerage services. So we trade for ourselves, we trade for our clients, and so on and so forth. At one time, we also dabbled into currencies, but that wasn't a very good move, so we left it and came back and just concentrated on equities and debt. Then, after that, we then set up an asset management company. We bought an existing firm. In fact, the securities firm we talked about earlier was also an acquisition, so we've done quite a few acquisitions, in our growth. So our growth has been both organic and also acquisitive. We acquired the asset management firm from Access Bank, and that's now beginning to operations. And and then recently we acquired a finance company, and the finance company is slightly different from everything I'd mentioned earlier because the advisory, securities, and asset management are regulated by the Securities and Exchange Commission of Nigeria. And the finance company is regulated by the Central Bank of Nigeria. So right now, those are the four major operating entities under the Dunlor & Merrifield Group.
So you're talking about this growth of John Loren, that obviously a lot of it is thanks to you. How would you describe your role as a CEO of a multinational company?
I think what's important, is as a CEO, is vision. You've got to know where you're going. I think that's, even if you put it in the practicality of life, you have to know where you're going, and people need to be able to understand that. So from vision comes communication. How do you communicate your vision, to your employees or to your colleagues, such that they can actually see what you see, Passion, comes out as one thing. And like I would say to people, success is about loving something enough to be passionate about it, to be able to do it every day without thinking about it, So, and that passion, to actually now exude that passion in each and every staff that works with you is something that a CEO has to do if he wants to have, or if she wants to have, the same level of drive to achieve their ambitions. And I think, that's what I have to do, every day, or every year, or every 6 months, or every quarter, to be able to continue to motivate, the people I work with, that the vision is clear. This is where we're going. This is why we're doing what we're doing. And also being able to, celebrate success. What I've been able to do, I think, is, which is not common with most other people who work, in my area, and even in the Nigerian space, is, celebrating success is one thing. Another thing is also being able to let go. Let the people under you also grow. You give them that space, be able to, to grow to where they are. So, for instance, the companies I mentioned earlier all have MDs now, and my job is also to groom them. Which allows me space to think more strategically, as opposed to spend time on execution itself, and that's also been helpful. So, I guess if I tie that into celebrating success, means that obviously these people have been able to consistently prove themselves to get to the point where I can say to them, yes, you know what, you handle this business going forward, and congratulations, and let me, be there behind you, supporting you, and making sure that, you're successful in what you do. So that's been a good experience for me. And hopefully, if things go well, then, the amount of time I spend, with the businesses will go less and less. And that's kind of like, I remember once saying to the team, sometimes you look at yourself and say, I use the term 12 steps to retirement, 12 steps and 12 years to retirement. That's when I got 660, and the idea is basically by that time you can let the next generation, move and take that place. And that, you've created something that, can now move on to the next level, and so on and so forth. And I think that is, to my mind, how you create a sustainable institution, because it's all about people and giving them the opportunity.
You also once led the mortgage refinance institution in Nigeria.
Correct.
Explain the importance of this company in the mortgage and finance markets in Nigeria.
Oh, that's absolutely a crucial element of the Nigerian markets today. Nigeria, as you probably know, we're talking about a population of about 170 million people, and growing very fast. I think we're expected to be somewhere around 300 plus by the year 2030 or so. Yes. So it's a fast-growing population. And as we speak, we are running a housing deficit of somewhere between, some say 17 million, some say more, some say slightly less housing units. So the whole idea of this institution is to actually take a really big stab at this and trying to cure this deficit. So it was conceptualized actually through the president and the coordinating minister of the economy. And it's been capitalized now. We've set it up. There's just so much to talk about when we talk about this, because it's not just a company, it's also the environment within which it operates. So we've had to work on a mortgage and a foreclosure law. We've had to work on systems, because technology is extremely important for this. And the whole idea is that, when this company works and begins operations, that it's able to provide long-term financing to mortgage banks let me call them mortgage lenders, which means mortgage and also commercial banks who are in the business of providing mortgages. The idea is to make the 20-year mortgage a standard in Nigeria. This did not exist previously. So you don't find mortgages for 20 years because you don't have that kind of tenor of funding. So what NMRC is there to do is to reduce the deficit, ensure that you can get more Nigerians owning homes, create a market that didn't exist. In other words, for instance, if you look at property development, for instance, there's been a major shortage of funds into property development because of the speculative nature of property, in the sense that when you don't have the offtake through mortgages, financiers are very skeptical in providing financing, for property development, because the view is, well, after the property is developed, who buys it or where do they get the monies to buy it? But now that we can have now mortgages in place, then what you do is you create the demand for housing, which then creates, a demand for supply. And that way, then you're trying to create an extremely important part of the GDP of Nigeria. So today, housing is about 0.3% of GDP, very small. And, I would like to see housing somewhere around 30% of GDP, maybe in 10 years' time, If we cure that deficit, certainly will be, because, just to give you an example, if you looked at, let me say, 5 million naira, which is about, $40,000 or something like that. Even just times 1 million houses, that's 5 trillion. I can't tell you what that is in dollars right now, but that's a whole lot of money. So basically, you can imagine, Nigeria's economy right now is about just over $500 million, right? Am I correct? Yes. No, sorry, $500 billion, forgive me, $500 billion. So you can imagine that, housing with where it is right now, even if I said 170 trillion, which is pretty easily size, that's already, 100, billion. So it can play a very huge part of the growth of the Nigerian economy. And if you look at most developed countries, housing is a major component of GDP. And that's what we're trying to do for the country. And that was the reason why the NMRC was set up. We expect it to have major multiplier effects, jobs, the construction industry, the amount of jobs that will be created, building materials, the multiplier effects are just enormous.
So you're already talking about the financial market, but other than mortgages, tell us about how the Nigerian financial market is looking at the moment.
If I had to look at financial markets, I'll break it down into the different sectors. So you're looking at the bond markets, equity markets, FX markets. Let me just look at those three for now. Commodities very small. Bond markets extremely attractive, principally because the yields are very high. Risk-free rates now around 15-ish%. So that's pretty high for the current rating that Nigeria has. That's assuming that it's not downgraded, which I don't expect it to be, given that the oil price has now begun hopefully moving the other way. And I think it touched $60 yesterday, if I believe. So, so bond market's pretty attractive. Equity markets have dropped significantly in terms of prices, but that arguably now makes it very cheap, and therefore extremely attractive for investors to come in at this point in time, for those who want to ride an upward curve, especially for some who would say that Nigeria is more like a call option on the price of oil. And if you believe that the oil price will move the other direction, then it's just a very safe bet to jumping in. That's one. Secondly is that the currency has been under pressure, and most expect some level of devaluation. which means that for investors who had left the market before elections, coming back in now, they'll be coming back in much cheaper because now, they need less dollars to buy the same equivalent naira. So very attractive for investors to come in, foreign investors that is. And then the FX market, I mean, it's been pretty volatile, over the last couple of weeks. Again, two things. One, uncertainty with respect to elections, and then, the oil price. But what we see, now is that I think most people are settling for the dollar to the naira of around, hopefully about 180 to 200. We're not sure yet, but that's probably where, most people expect it to probably settle at 200. I think if the CBN was to devalue, CBN being the Central Bank of Nigeria, I think it'll probably be to the sort of like 180 mark. And that being the case, then it would trade, somewhere around 10 naira, plus or minus. Most likely plus 190, 195, about that. So that's where we see markets. So from the from investors' perspective, and I'm talking about specifically the foreign investors, I think it's been an attractive market for them. We've had mainly portfolio investors as opposed to foreign direct investment, and I think the portfolio investors have done pretty well. Playing in the Nigerian markets. So, yeah.
And what challenges does the Nigerian financial market face?
Well, if you look at it from foreign investors, I would say, look, they found it very, very easy to come out because there's no restriction on currency. Given the pressure on naira at this point in time, I'm not sure whether CBN be able to continue that. They might decide to tighten some of those rules. But again, the problem is that if they did, then again, it reduces the amount of, investors coming in, because obviously the less, the more friction you have going in and out of a country, the less attracted you are to it. So that's one issue. My view, the other thing, of course, is, the general stuff we people talk about, insecurity, Boko Haram, those are the key issues, really. And I think post-evaluation, and you have the currency settle, then your investors are much more at ease, because then they know that's the level where the naira is trading at. One of the things investors don't like is where you invest in a country and then you have a devaluation afterwards. Mm-hmm. Then of course it reduces your returns significantly. But I think what I expect within this first and second quarter is that post-elections, and assuming everything settles, which I'm sure it will do, you'll find investors then creeping back in, especially if we continue with the low interest rate regimes we have abroad, and the low inflations that we have, even possibly deflation in some countries, then of course people are seeking yield. And because they are, emerging markets or frontier markets like Nigeria would always remain, attractive, even if, it is just a small, minute percentage of the global portfolio that's allocated to that country. The point is that, because of that need for yield, is why people would always look at countries like that. Nigeria obviously has become a lot more attractive and a lot more visible to investors because of its current position as the strongest, or not the strongest, but the largest economy, in sub-Saharan Africa, including South Africa. It recently overtook South Africa as the largest economy last year when the economy was rebased. It hadn't been rebased for about 20 years. Wow. Yes, and when it was rebased, and then taking other components of the economies that have grown significantly over the last years, telecoms, Nollywood, and so on and so forth. That's how the economy today is now, I think it's somewhere just under $600 billion in terms of GDP. But then that's good growth. I mean, that's a good size economy. But when you look at it from a GDP per capita perspective, it's still very small, which means that, there's still a lot of wealth that needs to be created, domestically.
So how safe is it right now to invest in Nigeria? As
we speak, look, from a domestic standpoint, I see no problems whatsoever. But nevertheless, just normal human behavior or rational investor behavior is, I want to hold and see what happens with respect to the political situation. It's sad though, because, and I guess countries will probably have to just follow that hoop, in other words, you have to grow out of it. I mean, when you have elections, for instance, in the UK, investors don't stop investing because you're going to have an election, or in the US or whatever. But I'm sure they had their times, years gone by when that was the case. And that's what I mean by, I guess countries have to just grow out of that over time, whereby you can, you have a smooth operating market regardless of the political situation. But as it is today, both domestic investors and FDIs are basically on a wait and see basis. So everybody's on hold, and even those who have monies in securities, you have to, let me, convert to cash and so on and so forth. Exactly. But it's getting better. I mean, it is getting better. If I go back years ago, it was actually much worse. I mean, now you still, even with the insecurity, etc., it's a lot better. I would have imagined, for instance, if we didn't have the Boko Haram issues, whatever, I think, markets would have just continued as normal. But the issue of the, insurgency and so on and so forth, which, I mean, look, if you think about it, let's go back, say, to the UK, that was the years gone by when you had the IRA. Not much difference between Boko Haram, the same bombs and same everything, but markets still continued. People still traveled, and everything still continued as normal. So sometimes you wonder, why people would look at the market and say, well, because of this, that's the end. No, it's not. I mean, in many countries, even, I think it's Spain, a lot of countries have, the odd insurgents here and there who, do the stuff they do, but it doesn't stop, markets from continuing. So, my hope is that, like I said, the country grows out of it and understands that there's a thriving private sector that operates regardless. People still have to eat, people still have to work, people still have to do things regardless of what happens, and so therefore markets continue as they are, regardless of whether it's this party or the other party that gets in. Okay.
How can Nigeria sustain its position in Africa following the recent rebasing of the GDP that you told me about?
My opinion, it has to, I would say, major and consistent, sustainable investment in infrastructure. It needs to have that. That's the only way. I mean, look, it is very clear to most people who, most observers of markets that, there is no country that's evolved into what I'd say observers would say is a middle class country or emerging market or whatever, first world, whatever, without major, sustained, heavy investment in infrastructure. So if Nigeria wants to do that, then it has to do that. But not just realizing, because I think Nigeria has now realized that, infrastructure is a major, it's a major thing that it needs to do, but it also needs to create the enabling environment to move monies from funding government into funding infrastructure. When you have very high interest rates in an economy, your risk-free rate is at 15%, for instance. No pension fund manager in their right mind is going to be funding a bridge that has credit, market, and all kinds of risks when he can get or she can get 15% risk-free returns from the government. I mean, it just doesn't happen. So Nigeria needs to realize that to actually sustain or to like you said, sustain that level of that GDP growth that it desires, and the size it desires, then the investment it has to do in infrastructure, that enabling environment, which means that having what I would call a positive yield curve, short-term money being much cheaper than long-term money, and also making sure that the interest rate, okay, is at an economically viable rate across the curve, such that pension funds and banks invest in government securities for liquidity purposes, so that they have assets that are liquid, but invest in things like bridges, roads, the real sector, etc., for yield. Then that, can help the country. Obviously, there are other things, political stability and so on and so forth, all the other things that work in hand. But I think, to me, the most important thing in sustaining that level of GDP growth, and also that number one, position, has to be major investment in infrastructure for the country. So
taking into account all of this financial situation that we've just been talking about, as the CEO of Dunlop and Merrifield, what are your plans for the near future?
I think, look, the investment banking terrain is changing. Just this morning I was reading that Barclays has applied for an investment banking license in Nigeria, which is good news to some and bad news to others. I think that the terrain will change. It will become more competitive. It's a shame that our regulators, are not seeing what we see, in the sense that there's huge opportunities in that intermediation space. But let me use the term, denying us the right license to play our role in the country, is not allowing domestic firms to reach the potential that they could reach because of not having the right licenses to operate. And of course, what you're having, and it's beginning to start now, is you have the foreign, firms coming in to take that space. Now, to my mind, and I've worked in my previous life, when I was with IFC, across a lot of African countries. And I'm yet to see one African country where that has developed, where the banking or the investment banking space has been dominated by foreigners. If you look at South Africa, which is the most developed country on the continent, vis-a-vis sub-Saharan Africa, if you look at their banking space, it's dominated by what? ABSA, Standard Bank, Rand, which is First Rand, and I can't remember the fourth one. Netbank, sorry, that's Netbank. That's the big four. Yeah, they have Merrill Lynch there, they have Goldman's and whatever, but they play a very specific role, or specified role, within the system. And when you go to other parts of Africa where you have, the banking system dominated by, say, a Standard Chartered or a Barclays, etc., there's not much. So the reality of the matter is that, what I hopefully see is a system where institutions like ourselves can evolve, from being the firms that we are, evolve into becoming, say, for instance, a full-fledged merchant bank in the country, being able to employ, a lot of people, create jobs, for Nigerians, and create institutions, that can outlast us and, can continue to create jobs and provide the sort of, support and role that, investment institutions play in countries. There would always be a need for, firms like ourselves. And the thing is, what we don't want to see over the next 5 to 10 years is a withering of, firms that were founded by domestic indigents, and then, the space basically being taken over by, 1 or 2 or 3, foreign firms, which I don't have a problem with that, but the reality of the matter is there must be a balance. You find out that the firms that stay through the turbulence of countries tend to be the domestic firms. That's the truth. And it's important that our regulators realize this and ensure that they provide the enabling environment for domestic firms to also, to grow and reach their potential. I think that's important.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Mr. Sonia Yere, and congratulations on your award again.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Appreciate it.